In nearly 15 years of this hobby, I've never made a diorama. But today, we're going to change that. A bit ago, I noticed the set of Din Djarin and Grogu, or as we all know them, Mando and Baby Yoda. I didn't really have any plans to use them for the game or anything like that, but I just thought the minis were really cool and I knew I wanted to do something with them, so I went ahead and grabbed them from my local game store. I've always thought dioramas were cool, but I've always been a wargamer first. Nowadays, my interests are much more in the painting and hobby side, and I've always wanted to make a diorama and just create this cool scene for one of my favorite movies or shows. And I'll be honest, I've been binging a lot of Boile Hobby Time lately, and it's just really given me this bug to make my own diorama. I wanted to start simple and not bite off more than I could chew. I wanted to create a simple scene depicting a standoff between Mando, Baby Yoda, and some stormtroopers. I knew I wanted a desert scene. A lot of the show takes place in desert scenes, and I feel like deserts are just a pretty quintessential part of Star Wars. And I knew I wanted to put one of those classic looking kind of multi-panel Star Wars doors in the diorama as well. I began cutting the foam to shape, and I must say these hot wire cutters are really awesome. They work so easy. You know, they say the saying of, you know, cuts like hot knife through butter. And I mean, honestly, this thing really does. It's so cool how easy it is to use and how well it works on the foam. I knew I wanted a kind of background piece, and so I cut this slope and glued it to the back of my base area with hot glue gun. I searched every local hobby store I could and could not find foam safe super glue, so I'm just gonna have to buy some online. But the hot glue worked perfectly throughout this whole project, and I didn't have any issues with gaps or anything like that. So in order to seal the foam, I went ahead and mixed up some Mod Podge and acrylic paint and covered the whole thing in it. You can add plaster to give it more texture and create kind of a more natural ground and earth texture to the whole thing, but I'm going to do something a little later on to give it texture, and so I really just wanted to make sure I sealed the foam so that I could put more stuff on it and that the foam wouldn't break or have any issues. I let the Mod Podge dry overnight and have now decided to add some texture. I went ahead and took watered down PVA glue and covered the entire piece of foam in it. I then took sand and sprinkled it over the entire area, trying to keep it on my little tiny cutting mat so that I can reuse it. I also took some little rocks and PVA glued those to the diorama as well to kind of create some variation in the landscape, and so it doesn't all just look like barren desert. I tried to place these in areas where I thought they would have built up over time. Went ahead and sprayed the whole thing with isopropyl to let the glue kind of seep into everything, and then I let this part dry overnight as well. I was very impressed with how well this whole watered down PVA glue holds everything down. None of the sand or rocks were at risk of flaking off. Everything was rock solid on there. And so I just was really impressed that I didn't have to worry about little bits of sand kind of coming off over time. I went ahead and took my airbrush and primed the whole thing black. In hindsight, I probably should have gone with like a brown or tan just to give it not so dark of a base coat, but overall it doesn't make that huge of a difference. So unfortunately, my footage of me airbrushing it tan got corrupted and lost, so I don't have that footage, but I went ahead and airbrushed the entire thing in a Kislev Flesh tone, and then after that I went and dry brushed the whole thing with a couple different layers. I went ahead and used Kislev Flesh, Ushabti Bone, and just did a couple different layers of my dry brushing just to add some depth and variation to the entire piece. I did this in different directions as well, just to kind of help increase the variation and make it look a little bit more natural. This is my first time working with XPS foam and creating a diorama, and overall I think it came out pretty good. I mean, it looks like a desert for the most part. The only thing I probably would have changed was to do a lighter base coat first. I think the black was just a little too dark, and overall you can tell that the entire tone of the desert is just a little bit darker than maybe I wanted it to be. But all in all, I think it looks like a desert, and I think sets the scene for my miniatures. Something to note, I took the hot wire foam cutter and added one of the little knife tools and just put these little marks and nicks in the wall just to make it look weathered and add variation from sandstorms and such. And then I added Agrax Earthshade to these just to give them a little bit of depth and wear, just to try and break up and add more variation to the scene. So when I was first planning this diorama out, I was only going to do Mando and Baby Yoda, But then I remembered I had these pre-owned Stormtrooper miniatures. They're the specialist models from Star Wars Legion, and I thought that they would be a great addition to the diorama just to make it more engaging and add a little bit more of a story element to the entire piece. So the first miniatures I tackled were the Stormtroopers. They had a pretty thick white prime job from whoever I purchased them from before, but that's okay. It didn't really make that big of a difference. I was going to do a lot of weathering on them, and so this thickness doesn't really come into play. I was really hoping to make these guys look like the super weathered Stormtroopers that Mando meets initially in Season 1, and so I was going to do a lot of different effects to create this weathering. To start things off, I'm going to utilize one of the methods from my 3 methods to paint white video that I did of Clone Troopers, and the method I'm going to utilize is the Apothecary White Contrast Paint. I had a terrain piece, 5 minis, a door, a moisture evaporated, and so I was trying to pick painting methods that I thought would be quick and efficient. All I do is I take the Apothecary White Contrast Paint and cover the entire miniature in it. This just helps create a subtle gray tone in all the recesses, and since I'm going for a more weathered look, it kind of desaturates the white base coat. I took my favorite German gray and painted this into all the articulation points in the helmet, and then I painted pure black on the weapon. This next step I really think helped elevate the miniature and give it that extra bit of weathering. I took Agrax Earthshade, and instead of covering the whole miniature in this, I tried to be very selective with my placement of it and treat it more like a glaze. I put this in all of the recesses and then glazed it over kind of the bottom half of their boots just to give it that dusty look from, walking around the desert all the time. I wanted to give the effect that, dust and grime had been building into the recesses of these Stormtroopers on the run. The final key weathering effect I was going to do on these Stormtroopers was a chipped paint effect. I did this simply by taking a small piece of sponge and tweezers, dipping this in my pure black paint, blotting off a lot in a piece of paper towel, and then blotting this onto the Stormtroopers. I focused mainly on the large panel areas, and this just does a very quick and easy effect to look like the white of the armor is chipping, or that, grime or scrapes and scratches have occurred on the armor. Really helped sell the super weathered Stormtrooper on the run look that I was going for, and I think really captures the essence of those Stormtroopers Mando meets initially in Season 1. I was extremely excited to paint this Mando mini just because I think Mandalorian armor is pretty awesome looking. I went ahead and started with Thondia Brown for the undersuit. Really, it just gives a nice dark, rich chocolate brown. And then I took a lighter brown tone for the boots, belts, and straps just to add a little bit of variation in the leather tones. And to me personally, there are some essential details to Mando, and one of those to me is the yellow-tipped gloves. I don't know why, but adding little things like this really helps sell a mini for me and really help people look at it and go, wow, even that little details there, that's definitely Mando that I'm looking at. I really wanted to make sure that I got an obnoxiously shiny metallic tone for the armor and really capture that mirror-like effect that the Beskar has in the show. So I went ahead and used this bright steel from AK Interactive and just left it at that. I was trying to save time, so I didn't do a ton more with that, and it, captures that chrome-like effect that I wanted. If you wanted to go the extra mile and add a couple more steps, you could put Nuln Oil, any other type of black thin down paint into the recesses, and then do a little bit of a silver highlight on the top points. You could really increase the contrast and just drive that depth into the miniature. So this is the main event. This is what you're all here for. Let's paint this little tiny Baby Yoda. This is probably one of the smallest miniatures I've ever painted. It was honestly kind of cool to paint a miniature this tiny. Definitely, helps test your detail skills, but it was a really fun little paint job to do, and I encourage you to try and paint some little tiny miniatures. The clothing I kept pretty standard, just kind of a simple tan tone, so I just covered it in Kislev Flesh, did an Agrax Earthshade wash, and then just picked out the highlights with Kislev Flesh again. Once again, just trying to keep it simple. Baby Yoda's skin is a much lighter, paler green than like a traditional orc green, for example, which I think has a more of a fluorescent green effect. I really try to utilize some pale greens. It's the orc green paint from Citadel. I think this is a really good tone for it. I then utilized Daka Green Wash, which is an old, outdated wash from Citadel that I still have. But any type of dark green wash, you can either cover the entire skin in it, or you can kind of paint it into the recesses. After I did my wash, I went ahead and highlighted back with the pale green tone, and then I glazed some skin tone inside of the ears, and then did pure black on the eyes, and I think that's a little Baby Yoda there, if I say so myself. To add more interest to the diorama, I 3D printed a quote-unquote sci-fi door and a moisture evaporator. I feel like these are kind of quintessential Star Wars decor items, especially in a desert. The moisture evaporator to me is just such a sign of the Tatooine landscape, and so I wanted to add one of these. I kept these super simple: base coat, wash, dry brush, nothing too crazy here. So with all of our separate pieces completed, I took a little bit of this sandy pigment powder from Vallejo, put this in some of the recesses of the door and the moisture evaporator, and put the whole thing together, and now it's time to show this bad boy off. So there it is, the bad boy's complete. I think it looks really cool. It's not, you know, some huge epic super awesome diorama. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but this is my first time into it, but I really enjoyed this process. I highly encourage anyone interested in this hobby to try and make your own diorama, even if it's something pretty basic. I think it, you know, tests your a lot of skills. It definitely tests your planning, and so I really enjoyed doing this. I was pretty excited for the new season of The Mandalorian coming out, and really inspired me to make this diorama. So I encourage you to look at other mediums, whether that be TV shows, movies, video games that you like, and maybe look and see how you can make a diorama of that. If you like this video, go ahead and check out my 3 ways to paint white video. There's some other ways you can utilize to paint stormtroopers in that video. And of course, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. There's also a bunch of links in the description that can help me out too. I really appreciate you watching up to this point, and I hope you feel encouraged to go make your own diorama. As always, elevate your game night.